This time on Shift Points, we solve a big problem with the cooling system on this 1964 Ford Galaxie. We get a big fan and a shroud on this thing with just a little bit of fabrication work. Thanks for joining. Alright, so we're back working on the Galaxie. You guys saw last time we had a little bit of a fitment issue with the radiator, and basically whenever the fan's on this thing, it actually hits, the fan actually hits here, the end of this water pump. We initially thought maybe we could kind of cut the end of this water pump off, but even then the new bolts that stick out of the pulley here, they're going to stick out the same distance as that nub there, so we weren't really going to gain anything. It was still going to hit. So what the plan is now is this radiator set's basically like something like this with the stock mount, but that's going to make us a mount, and I hear him over there working on it right now. That's going to bring this, it's going to pull this back so we clearanced a little on each side of the radiator, make sure it went into the radiator support there, and it's going to basically bring this radiator up to where it's sitting like this, which is much more vertical, which should gain us all the room that we need to get a clearance on that. And that's again so that we can run that the big fan with the shroud. So we're going to maximize the cooling on this thing completely. The other thing is I took this water pump pulley off because the groove in here where the belt sits is pretty rusty and rough. I'm going to take a wire brush and clean this up and then probably haze a little paint on it just to kind of smooth it up a little, kind of help with that. And I think Dad, like I said, is working on that radiator mount. While Dad works on that radiator mount a little bit, we've been kind of mocking it up and figuring out what we need with this. I decided to go ahead and start working on wiring up this distributor. So that distributor is going to have to come back out. There's no extra ports in this intake manifold to let us put the fan switch that came with our electric fans in the intake so that we can get accurate temperature. So what we're going to have to do is actually drill and tap what used to be the gauge sending unit. We're going to drill that hole bigger and tap it, put the fan switch there, and then come right here next to this water port that's going to be for the heater hoses, and we're going to put the smaller gauge sending unit here. So this is much smaller, it'll fit into this area no problem. And then back here is where the old where this sending unit used to be, and what we're going to drill and make it bigger so that we can put that in there. So but while we were kind of waiting on that, I decided I was going to go ahead and wire up this distributor. It's got 4 wires off of it, and then the diagram is here. It says we're using this canister. The Southwest Performance Parts comes with detailed ways on how to hook these up, depending on what you're doing, if it's a canister coil, if it's an e-coil, or if it's running into a MSD box. So they give you really detailed instructions on how to do that. So what I'm doing with this canister coil is we're going to be running to the positive and the negative side of the coil, and we also need to run a ground. So my plan, this harness came with a plug that would go onto this, but within this Ford application in the coil, and luckily that coil mounts in here no problem to where the original coil was. So it's going to mount up right here. I have the bracket right here. I'd taken it off. I have that mounted right there. That's going to be no problem to take this thing off, or to mount this coil right where it needs to be. So the harness isn't really needed for us because this is so close. So what I did is I cut the other side of that plug off and got these wires stripped. What I'm going to do is I'll have my 2 wires here are going to go to each side of the coil. This is going to be the ground, which I'm actually going to put right here under the bolt that mounts the coil, because that's going to ground it straight to the engine block. So it's going to be a really good ground. Don't have to extend the wires or anything. And this gray wire is for the tack. This thing doesn't have a tack in it, so I'll probably just wrap this up and keep it up here out of the way until I do eventually add a tack to it at some point. But that Southwest Performance Parts harness also comes with a gray wire that plugs directly into that. That's a big extension that I can run into the cab, or into the inside of this thing anytime that I decide to do that. So I'll just tape that up, keep it out of the way so it doesn't get chafed or anything. And then that'll be a future day, but this will go ahead and get this wired up in place. And that should be really easily done as far as that goes. And we won't have to try and cut the wires and cut the harness and all that stuff. So this is by far the simplest way to do it, we think. So I'm going to go ahead and get that wrapped up. So like I said earlier, I think this is going to be a really clean install. Really important, just want to remind everybody, I know I've said this before, but on these connectors like this, it's really important to make sure you pick the connector that's the closest to the wire size that you're using. That's going to make sure that when you crimp it, you have a really good mechanical grip on that wire. You're not going to have to, you know, I've seen people take wires and cut them long and then bend them double so that they'll fit into a bigger connector. Just take the time to get the right size connector, really helpful. And also another thing is on these shrink connections, I know it's getting a little blurry there, whenever you heat shrink them, there should be a little bit of the connector or the sealant really come out the bottom of this right there at the base of that. That's how you know you have them heated up properly and you have them sealed up to make sure that that's a good waterproof connection. So, but anyway, this should make that really easy. Wire this up to the coil, which will end up mounting here, and then wire this right there so it's grounded to the engine block. It's going to be really perfect. So anyway, just wanted to get that done and out of the way. I think now that that's done, we're going to pull the distributor out and probably look at working on getting these sending units put in place. So we center punched that with a little spring-loaded handheld center punch, and then Dad took a good sharp center drill and run that in there. We're running that vacuum all the time because this is going into the water outlet, so we got to try and keep all that cleaned out as much as possible so it doesn't suck a bunch of metal shavings through the cooling system. Tap drill for this guy is an R drill bit, which is what this is right here. So this is what he needs. Alright, got that guy in place there. So this is the fan switch right here. So that's what's going to turn our fans on and off. It's a temperature unit there. Reads temperature, turns the fans on when it gets to a set temperature. It's important on these right here, on all of these sending units that go into the block like this, to do not use any sort of nylon tape or thread sealer or anything like that, because this is where the ground is happening for this sensor. So you don't have a ground wire to it. It's using the actual intake manifold here as the ground. So can't run any sort of sealer on those. There's a storm coming, so we're going to hurry and get this one in so that we can get that compressor turned off. So before I got here today, Dad was already working on this upper radiator mount. I showed you guys what we're going to kind of have to do to get that radiator pulled back so that the fan doesn't hit the water pump. And so this is what he'd come up with. We had this piece here that he actually took and reinforced to make this really sturdy. It was a single wall piece, and he doubled it up there, got that really sturdy. And this fits those existing rubbers that isolate that radiator. Fits it really snugly, so we're able to use those original ones that were already there in this piece too. And this has you can see this is where it comes up in the front of the radiator, well, I guess the back of the radiator cradle, depending on how you're looking at the car. But you can see how far back this is going to end up moving that radiator, which is going to give us plenty of clearance out here on that water pump, comes up and over, and it has the same angle as the original. We're very, very close to the same angle as the original here, sitting on the ground there. But you can see there, that angle's very close. That's going to come up, over, and then we're going to drill 2 holes in this, and it's going to bolt right back in place, just like this one did. And that's going to bring this thing back, get us the clearance that we need, so that it'll clearance that water pump, and it's going to look really good too. So we're going to go ahead and get those holes drilled, and we'll be ready to go. And before we get too far along, I did go ahead and get this water pump pulley, got it cleaned up, took and put it in a wire brush. That's got a pedestal grinder with a wire brush on it. Put that in there, cleaned up the track where the belt runs, and then hazed a little black paint on this. It turned out really well, but I want to go ahead and get this thing put back in place before we get the radiator mounted, because it is such a tight fit that the radiator has to come out for you able to take this off. So I'm going to go ahead and get this put in before we forget, and we have to pull the radiator out after we get it installed. See, there's about a ½ inch. It's definitely nothing extra, but it does clear, and that thing is solidly mounted up in place there. And just a reminder, kind of like why all this effort is so we can run this big fan with the shroud. This big fan with or without a shroud was better than the little fan, the low profile fan without a shroud, or excuse me, with a shroud. So now we have best of both worlds. We have the biggest and best fan and the shroud. We're going to maximize the coolant on this engine, and it's going to do what we need it to do. Alright, that added some gussets on each side of this just to kind of give it a little more strength just in case. Seemed okay, but it did that to add a little bit of rigidity to it. You can see this thing's mounted up in place. It's still got that same amount of gap and all that, but this has the holes drilled. This is mounted up and in place now. We've been discussing whether we paint it or we leave it like that. I might just leave it like that, to be honest with you. It kind of goes with the rest of the radiator. But yeah, you can see here that there is some, with the rubber in there, the radiator's not bound up or anything. That's all good, but it is solidly mounted forward, front and rear, so shouldn't come back and get into the water pump or anything like that.
Okay, we ended up having to take that distributor back out of that Galaxie. We had to drill and tap some places in the intake for the water temperature sending unit and the switch for the fans. So anyway, while we had the distributor out, thought I'd take time to go through the timing advance on this distributor while we had it out. Most of these distributors, when you get them, aftermarket distributors, when you get them, they've got the heaviest centrifugal advance springs in them that they have supplied for them. The good folks at Southwest Performance Parts is where we got this distributor. It comes with it's pretty neat. It comes with a sheet that's got the different timing advances with the different springs and the advanced weight bushings that come with the distributor, which is, I thought that was pretty neat. It does have, we'll take a rotor button off here and I can show you. It's got 3 sets of springs with it. Comes with the heaviest, of course. The black springs are installed in the distributor when you get it. It comes with 2 more sets, and you can kind of tailor the advance curve in the distributor with the different springs. It comes with 2 more sets of springs and 3 advanced bushings. We're going to try to go with these lightweight. This motor in this Galaxie is a 390-inch FE Ford motor, which is without any kind of modifications, a bone stock engine that comes with a 64 model car. It's a fairly low RPM operation, so we want to get the timing in it a little bit earlier at the heavier springs, the one that's in it now. The full timing advance comes in at actually about 5,500 RPMs. That's with no advance bushing. We don't want to turn that motor that much at all. So we're going to go with these lighter weight, these weight springs here. We're going to install these. Go with these springs, no bushings. It's real simple. The distributor's real neat. There's a nut underneath this right here you can take off. It has this pin, and it limits if you want to install a bushing, it will limit the amount of travel that these weights will go. So I want this thing to advance. According to this, it will put about 18 degrees. The centrifugal weights will put about 18 degrees more advance in the distributor, in the timing, with no bushing. So I want this thing to go full advance. If I put these, according to their sheet, and I'm going to check this when we get it in the car, I'll check and see it and see how close this is to real life in this particular car. According to this, at 2,500, this thing will have all the centrifugal advance in the distributor with the small weights at 2,500 RPMs. The other ones are limited, like I say, the heavy springs that's in it now, full timing advance won't be into 5,500, and if you go to these medium weight springs, it comes in at 4,000. I want all the timing in this thing about 2,500. We probably won't operate this motor more about 4,500 would be probably outside how much we want to advance. We want to turn this engine. So I'm gonna put these lightweight springs in, get that advance in a little bit earlier, put all the advance in about 2,500. And okay, we got these springs switched out, and you can see the difference, how much heavier the black spring is than the light colored, I think they call it a silver spring. It makes these advanced weights open much easier, much quicker. So according to this, if this is accurate, like I say, we're going to check this when we put it in. That I don't know exactly what the compression ratio is on that car. Probably end up having to run premium gas in it. I don't know for sure, but according to this, the chart says it's going to give me about 18 degrees of centrifugal advance in the distributor. So if I run about 16 degrees initial, which is a little bit higher than I would have suspected. But anyway, if I run about 16 degrees, that'll put me at about 34 degrees total advance on the timing in that motor. So, and we'll check I'll hook a tack up to it and see if we can actually check at what RPM we've got full advance, and we'll look into that when we get the distributor back in the motor.
So that got you up to speed on why he ended up changing the springs in this distributor yesterday. Got that thing dropped back in place here, so that's all done there. He's back here working on pulling seals out of the back of this axle, or out of the axle housing. He got the one side out. We went up to the Napa store and got some new ones. So he's working on getting this side out right now. When I put this distributor back in place, I went ahead and connected up the ground here like I had planned to the cylinder head here. That should give that a good ground. Then when we get the coil put in place here, we can get the other two connections done, and then I'll just bundle up this tack wire for now and just get it up out of the way. The other thing is, a couple days ago, Southwest Performance Parts sent over this nice new alternator. So we're going to get this thing put in place. This, like I said, is a 1G style alternator, and it should really just kind of fit right up on this bracket, which would be really nice. So then the wiring is pretty simple from what I can tell. I've been reading online to make sure that I do this right. From what I understand, if I'm right now, we should be able to run this is a one wire style alternator. I can run one wire off the back of this alternator to the battery side of the starter solenoid right there. Then I can eliminate all the wiring and the voltage regulator. This is internally regulated, this alternator is, so I can get rid of that external voltage regulator. which is that guy right there. That can go away, and with that away, we can simplify the wiring a lot, get rid of a bundle of wire. The only thing is, I think, from everything I can read from the wiring diagrams that I looked at, there is one wire on the battery side of this regulator that runs to this relay right there, which is for the horns. So I will have to run a wire over here to put power to the horns, to that relay, to the battery power to the relay. I'm gonna get this alternator hung on here and see how it looks and make sure that's gonna work how it's supposed to. And then, like I said, Dad's back here working on that right now, working on the axle seals. So we're gonna get to it. So I got this alternator dropped in place. So far, this is working perfectly. When you push this out, when you push this over like it will be in tension when you put the belt on, that spins freely, that clears everything super nicely. This is the way to go if you're swapping over to a alternator from a generator, because this is great. I put this bolt in the top, I've got the bolt back there on the bottom, and that's gonna, like I said, that's gonna allow us to adjust. All we gotta do is tighten that up when we get a belt, which we also need to do. We'll have to measure and do that. Then I'm gonna start working on the wiring for this deal. See if, I'm hoping this is gonna work. I pulled the generator wiring out and pulled this voltage regulator off. It's all laying over here. This stuff is stiff as a board. Probably good that all this is coming out. So hopefully that's gonna work how it's supposed to. And while I was doing all that, Dad's been over here putting in seals. So he got the old one out. He's getting that one driven in place. Alright, got to reading up on this thing a little bit more. I don't think that generator light is actually, that wire there is actually the ground wire. It is some sort of sensing wire. So it has to see voltage. So I'm not sure about that. So I don't know in this setup, everything that I've read, it's kind of saying that it doesn't look like that's going to be able to work. I'm gonna think about it and try and figure it out a little bit more, because surely there's a way for that to see, for that to be able to sense that and kind of do that. So I don't know, but let's look at it some more. But I will show you this real quick. I did get this orange wire here. This is to the two wires that go to the battery. I've got this wire, I haven't got it connected yet, but I have it run here, and it's going to go on this side of the starter solenoid, so it'll be constant battery. This wire here is run down here and connected to the back of the alternator. That should be what we need there to have this alternator charge the battery. So that's all run here, that's there, alternator's in place. So because we're using the external solenoid, I was looking on the Power Master at the starter that we got here. On the starter, you can see it's got a hookup for the battery, of course. This is where the battery cable will go to, and then it also has this ignition. But because we're using that external solenoid up on the fender, we can just jump this. It says you can just run a wire between these two. So my plan is to use this heavy gauge wire that I used to run from the alternator up to the battery, to the starter solenoid, and I'm going to make me a jumper here on this, and then that will let us go ahead and get the battery cable hooked up, and then get the starter put on, and then we can run all the rest of the battery cables also. So that'll kind of open up the door a little bit if we can get that in place and done. So I'm going to go ahead and get that done before I even work on getting the fans wired up. One thing I hadn't mentioned, we did get these the other day. We got our battery cables, USA battery cables. So this is the one that'll run over to the starter solenoid from the battery. This guy will run down from the starter solenoid to the starter, and then this will be our ground. That's going to run down to the bolt that bolts up to the starter to the bell housing, and then run up to the negative side of the battery. That's going to give us really good ground on everything. That's going to give us really good cables here. This is single aught stuff. It's nothing like our single or this is one gauge. Sorry, instead of the single aught or the double aught like we've been getting in the past, these single gauge wires are going to be these 1 gauge wires be plenty enough for what we're going to do with them. So so these are here and ready to go. I got that jumper made on the starter, and so I think we can go ahead and get that thing bolted up and ready to go in. I'm going to put one end of this battery cable on it before I get under there, because the terminals are pointed toward the block. So you have to run it. You have to attach it before you put the starter up in place, or it'll be really, really hard to get to. So that's my plan, and I got these long enough to where I think shouldn't be no issue to pull that starter off and disconnect it in the future. They're not crazy long, but they're long enough to hopefully to be able to do that if we need to, if we ever have to take it off again. Alright, got over here, got the starter mounted up in place. You guys maybe can see that down there. And got the battery cables run. This ended up being way more work than I was expecting, to be honest with you, on the battery cables. The ground is probably, I wish I had gotten it just a little longer. It would have given me a little more option on how to route this. And the long positive, I wish I had got a little shorter. It's too long. So that's just how it goes sometimes. They're both going to work. I think they're both going to be fine, but at the same time would have made it a little easier. What I ended up doing for the ground, you can see back there, that is a through hole there. That's what that starter bolt is. So what I did, so it wouldn't get into the exhaust, it would stay out of the way, got a longer bolt, run it through, and then, this was Dad's suggestion, I was trying to figure out what the heck to do. He said, would run this longer bolt through, put the battery cable on it, and then put a lock nut on the back side of that. So that's got that locked. It's grounded to the starter. It's got a really good ground. The positives over there on the other side of the starter. It's running up through here, coming up here to the starter solenoid, and we have our little short wire here to go to the positive side of the battery. And I went ahead and put some of our sheathing on the 2 wires, the one to the back of the alternator and the one that's running over and powering the horn relay and the power wire that runs into the interior of the car. So this is all kind of wrapped up. Like I said, this negative cable is going to end up kind of routing something like this, something like that, I think, so that I can maybe take a zip tie or something, put this over here on this alternator just to double check and make sure that this doesn't get against this exhaust. The way the positive is run, it's run down below the motor mount, so no chance of getting it into the exhaust at all. I might still run some of our big sheathing on these. I always like to run some of that sheathing just to be precautious. I know this is good and insulated, but just a little bit extra just in case it rubs, just so it doesn't chafe or do anything crazy. So I might still do that, but that is all there. That's how that's going to end up living, I think. And like I said, ended up being a little bit bigger job than I expected it to be, but it's all bolted up. It should work, should be really good. So that'll do that much for this week. That's pretty much going to do us for this week. It was a big deal to get that fan and that radiator in place. That's going to keep this thing cool, which is really important. After talking to the guys at Champion Radiators, I definitely wanted to keep this big fan if at all possible. So that's a really good thing. And we checked off a few other things on this as well as we move forward. We're trying to plug away at this, trying to kind of just move forward on it. We're really not that far away. I think the dominoes are kind of going to start falling here shortly. We'll pretty much have the motor wrapped up, I think, next week. Try and get the brakes on the back of this thing next week also. Then hopefully have the master cylinder brake booster and everything mounted too. And then we'll kind of just have maybe a handful of other little things to do. So, big week. It's all good. We're just going to, like I said, just keep plugging away at it. Thank you guys for subscribing. It's been really awesome. I mean, I think we're well over 700 subscribers at this point, and that's just, it's really amazing. I've wanted this to work, and I wanted some good things to happen with it, and I think so far there has been a lot of good things, and it's all because you guys who have hit that button that pops up in the center of the screen when we get to the end of these videos. It's really, really helpful. It's very, very important to us. It'll help us keep doing this for a long time, hopefully. If you want to, check us out on social media too, on Facebook and Instagram. We're putting up stuff pretty much every day. Go check that out. It's pretty fun, I think. And it also kind of gives some behind the scenes when we go to shows and we go do other things with these cars and the trucks that we're working on. So thank you guys for joining. We'll see you next week. See you later.